everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to talk about specifically what it means to have your Mercury in Sagittarius or Mercury in the 9th house. My name is Brandon. This is part of a much larger series I'm doing here on YouTube, where I go over every single planet and every single sign and house. I have a playlist down below you're welcome to check out, where I go through every single planet and sign prior to Sagittarius in the 9th house. So if you have anything in any of the first 8 houses or Aries through Scorpio, there is a video down there for you. And this video is specifically going to be talking about Mercury. So in this particular video, we're going to kind of break it up into a bunch of different portions, one of which is Mercury within astrology, and then Mercury in Sagittarius, and Mercury in the 9th house. And I am going to be putting the timestamps down below, so you're welcome to kind of skip around and go to whatever portion really resonates with you and is really what you're here to watch, right? Now, Mercury, we're gonna go into that in a moment, but I do want to let you guys know as well, if you guys are completely confused as if you even have your Mercury in Sagittarius, I would highly recommend you get your birth chart kind of drawn up and looked up, and I have a link down below you're welcome to check out for that, so you can get a better idea of if you even have Mercury in Sagittarius or Mercury in the 9th house, and to do that you're going to need your birth time and place to get a better idea of where the stars and the planets were at when you were born, relative to your birth chart, relative to you, right? So that's kind of another thing. And then, of course, if you guys are interested in anything with me, this is YouTube. You know my links are down below. Obviously, like, comment, share, subscribe. It's all going to help me there. And yeah, this is just a really, really fun series. I'm really excited to be doing this. And also, I want to preface this before I go into, even though I'm probably going to mention it a crap ton in a little bit here. This is a placement I actually have. So I actually have this placement myself. So I want to, every time I've had one of these, I have mentioned the natural biases and the natural, also empirical data that I've been able to gather through simply having this placement myself. So I will be sharing some personal stories with all of you as it relates to this particular placement as we go through that portion. So just wanted to let that be kind of known as well. But yeah, that's pretty much the little intro there. Nothing really more. Let's move on specifically to talk about what Mercury means within astrology. Okay, so Mercury in astrology. Mercury is one of those very adaptable, very mutable, very kind of changeable planets, right? Mercury is all about communication, all about our mental kind of communication, understanding, our opinion, our voice, how we speak, how our mind is kind of focused around, what we put our focus, our attention towards, as well as what Mercury is pertaining to. It has a lot to do with trade as well, trade and sales and anything that is very communicative, and that is how you do things. So think about also, or a lot of information processing is also mercurial. So if you think about like someone who does driving, right? Or someone who is a librarian or an analyst, that's a very mercurial job. Mercury is very much like the messenger in a lot of ways. It is the planet that just kind of communicates and helps us understand the world around us and helps us make sense of what we're going through. So Mercury's placement is going to indicate a lot of different things in the chart. It is going to indicate a lot of where your mind is going, as well as kind of what it is that you're specifically more focused on than others. And Mercury has natural rulership of Gemini and Virgo. It's considered to be exalted in the sign of Virgo. And then because of that, it is on the other end of the spectrum. The opposite signs of Gemini and Virgo is Sagittarius, or are Sagittarius and Pisces, which is where Mercury is not considered to function that well. Now, another thing I need to bring up here, I will not really bring it up as much for this particular video, but Mercury, there are also some debates in the astrological community about how Mercury may be considered exalted in the sign of Aquarius, and therefore considered fallen in the sign of Leo. So there is a couple of different connections there. With Mercury as well in astrology, it's important to look at specifically what house Mercury is in. Obviously, if you're watching this from Mercury in the 9th house, this is the video for you. But depending upon where Mercury sits, Mercury will really focus your mind towards those specific topics, as well as the sign placement obviously is gonna layer in that as well. And just kind of the way that one thinks is very keyed into Mercury. And there is a lot of different conversations being had, how one speaks, who one speaks to, the information acquisition process, as well as the information output process, right? That's what you'll tend to see with Mercury, is that exchange of information and how one goes about that. and how one learns best as well, how one processes information. So knowing all of that, Mercury also, it's really important to look at specifically Mercury's aspects, house placements, all different things in the chart. Also to see if Mercury is retrograde. So if you do have a Mercury retrograde, there is an aspect of that is about revisiting, relearning, relaunching, looking at, re-understanding, all these sorts of things here. So just be aware of the way that Mercury tends to operate within retrogrades or not. Also, of course, if you're ruled by Mercury, so if you are a Gemini or Virgo rising or have prominent Gemini or Virgo placements, whether it be the sun, the rising, or just a lot of them, your Mercury placement's going to have a lot more input, right? It's going to have a lot more to say and a lot more to kind of direct because of the fact that a lot of the chart is looking into that Mercury in specific. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. There is just kind of a quality there that I think needs to be kind of spoken to. So that's pretty much all of the Mercury and astrology things. Let's go into specifically what Mercury means in Sagittarius. Okay, so we have Mercury in the sign of Sagittarius. So I had spoken about this in previous portions, but Mercury is not considered to be in its best in this sign. Mercury is considered to be in detriment in the sign of Sagittarius because it's opposite the sign that it rules, which is Gemini. And then also, other thing I wanted to say that I've definitely said in here already is this is my own placement. This is my own Mercury placement. And I have a lot to say about this, obviously. And I'll get to my own personal stories in a moment. But Mercury in Sagittarius, a lot of people will speak about how Mercury doesn't really do well in Sagittarius. So you could find people with, speech impediments, which I have had, and I still have from time to time, or people that are unable to really understand the world, or their way of processing things is very strange, very different, and their way of memory and memorizing things, and it's not very organized. They're very disorganized in their thinking, and they're not really prioritizing certain tasks and certain things. So there can be this mental kind of, or mental or speaking inability or struggle with Mercury in a sign that it does not like to be in. Now, Mercury is in a Jupiter-ruled sign, so we put the planet of, details and orientation and facts and figures into the sign of its opposite, which is Sagittarius. It's about philosophy, religion, theology, bigger points, bigger pictures. Mercury is kind of forced to communicate about those bigger things, but it doesn't really know how to that well. It can, but it does struggle because there is a sense of logic that is really needed. And you can find with Mercury in Sagittarius that they tend to bring a lot of mental focus towards understanding religion, their why. One of the biggest things that Mercury in Sagittarius has experienced is just constantly asking why, and that constant kind of looping process, I think. There is a lot of philosophical qualities with Mercury and Sagittarius, where they have a lot of conversations around philosophy, religion, theology, astrology, law. There's just a lot of their focus is when Sagittarius is about learning what laws govern us. Why are we here? How does these things work, right? And that's where Mercury can do well when it is placed in Sagittarius, when it's specifically focused around the different sorts of laws that are around you and the understanding of those. Granted, it can get lost in that for sure. It's very, very commonly get lost in that. But if Mercury in Sagittarius really does focus in on things that are Sagittarian, so philosophy, religion, theology, different cultures, different languages, different ways of understanding the world, that's where Mercury in Sagittarius does really well. Where it has a natural inclination towards foreign cultures, foreign languages, and different legal jargon, legal understanding, and just bigger, larger than life conversations that has a lot to say. And Sagittarius is very much the storyteller in a lot of ways. It's the philosopher. It's the traditions that we have, that we pass down culturally from generation to generation. And so when you have Mercury in Sagittarius, your mind is kind of around, what are all these cultural things? Why do we have all these things here? What is our, what's the cultural reasoning for this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why is my family doing this? Why is my family not doing this, right? that's what you tend to see, or why is other families doing it this way? There's a lot of curiosity when we put Mercury in Sagittarius, and it can be kind of a very like quick curiosity where it kind of just gets burnt out from things, but it learns a lot really fast. At least that's what I've experienced, where I learn a lot really quickly and then I just kind of scrap it. And it's like the curiosity can be really a great asset, but it's not actually finishing that entire story all the time, right? It's kind of like getting all these little pieces of it and never actually putting the full story together, okay? Now, Mercury and Sag, I've kind of already said this, but there is an inclination towards foreign language and just kind of speaking about different cultures, different things. And for me, I also need to say this in my own specific chart, but I have a Mercury-Jupiter mutual reception, meaning that my Mercury in Sagittarius, although it's in the sign of its detriment, it is getting some support from the other sign. So we have Mercury and Jupiter kind of exchanging signs in that example. And so my Mercury does not function as a just standalone Mercury in Sagittarius would, because of the support I have with the ruler of Sagittarius, which is Jupiter, which is obviously something that I've said in all these videos, where it's important to look at the rulership of your Mercury placement, which in this example is Jupiter. So look to your Jupiter placement for a better idea of what specifically is that your belief systems are at. And for me specifically, like I said, because my Jupiter is in a Mercurial sign and my Mercury is in a Jupiterian sign, they support one another. So I think I have a little bit more of a mitigated and different approach that not every Mercury Jupiter person is going to have, and I have a lot more of the kind of support on both ends from both Mercury and Jupiter to kind of lend to those higher, larger than life conversations. And because of that too, I think it does, for me specifically, it does really highlight the power of how Mercury Jupiter can play out. And I think that's why I want to share my own personal stories and little tidbits I've experienced throughout my life. As a Mercury Jupiter person, one of the biggest things I get, there's a couple other parts in this, but the biggest thing I get is that I am very loud. I'm just very loud. I'm very loud, very blunt as well. I can be very blunt. I can be very just like quickly get this done, let's go, like kind of conversation. I can also be motivational very much, and that's very Jupiterian as well. I literally am a motivational speaker. That is part of what I do, and just broadcasting of one's message. When you have Mercury Jupiter really prominent, your opinion, your voice is going to be heard, and it is going to be utilized for teaching. And so for me specifically, I utilize it for a lot of teaching, not just astrology. I utilize it outside of astrology, but it does add a lot of different sorts of connections between my own story and the bigger kind of philosophical discussions around my own story. So there's a lot of things with Mercury Sag where it really wants to like discuss about its life and its story and look at its life in a philosophical or like spiritual lens or an astrological lens as it relates to me. And it's allowed me to really see a lot of different things, even though I didn't know why, right? Mercury and Sag also has a couple other things I want to say that I've both experienced myself and that I feel is relevant. So Mercury and Sag, one of the things that happens to me quite often, if not always, my entire life, is Mercury and Sag has this gift because it is Jupiter and it has like a luck to it, where I tend to not really know where I'm going in a conversation. And I just kind of do it. I just kind of go and I trust it and I have faith in it. And I have faith that what I'm saying is well-intentioned, or that I know what I'm trying to say in like the bigger picture. And then I just keep talking and talking and talking, and then it gets there, right? Now, on that same note, Mercury Jupiter, it's a lot of excess talking. I talk a lot. Like it is and it's almost like not knowing where the boundaries lie sometimes and not really grounding it. So the thing is with me, Mercury and Sag, something that I can do, and I know I've mentioned this in the Jupiter Virgo video that I did as well, because that is obviously my Jupiter sign, but I can inflate parts of a situation or something I'm analyzing, inflate and hyperfixate on parts of a problem that are irrelevant, that are not really, really important. And Mercury can kind of get caught up on specifically, it can enlarge certain things, right? And it can, ignore other things. So something I've run into in my life that has been a consistent issue in how I look at problems, I think this is where Mercury in Sagittarius and also in Pisces for different reasons can struggle. Because for me, what I'll do is I'll try and look at all of my problems at once. I will look at every single problem that is all interwoven and see how they're all interconnected, and I'll make all those connections, and that's very overwhelming. And it has caused me to shut down very easily when I'm looking at all of the opportunities or all of the avenues at which I can do something or solve a problem. And so that's another thing with Mercury in Sag that I've run into quite often, where I try and fix all the problems at once, but it's not, Mercury can't, and that's how Mercury looks at problems. And it works really well for very large sort of like things that need you to look at it all at once. And like astrology, for example, looking at a chart, right? Even though within that as well, I still will expand upon and move beyond, the natal chart, and I'll look at other charts and things. And that's what really like inspires me, is looking to see how many charts I can kind of hold at the same time, which is pretty interesting. It's very Mercury Jupiter, where it's like it doesn't really know the limits, and it wants to keep going and keep exploring and keep expanding and learning a bunch. And another thing I've said as well with Mercury and Sagittarius is, for me specifically, I have this desire to kind of see things from every single perspective. So an analogy I've used for a very long time in my life is, if I were to be on a stage or watching a performance of some sort, and there were an audience, I would want to be able to sit in every single chair in that audience, because if you ever watch a play, you know that there's different perspectives that you can see from where you're oriented in the audience, right? And that is how I've always looked at life, is I always want to understand every single perspective there can be looking at the same problem. And as you can imagine, that can also be quite overwhelming as well. But it has been ultimately advantageous for me, as I've been kind of very mentally astute and very mentally well, like kind of traveled, I guess you could say. There is a cultural connection to me and my family as well. In addition to that, foreign languages. Mercury in Sag has just a knack for foreign languages typically. Once again, my Mercury Jupiter is just really strong. So for me, I very quickly picked up multiple languages when I was younger. I picked up both Spanish and Japanese, and I really, really loved them. And I just pick up accents really quickly, and I'm able to kind of just connect with a mental kind of the idea of what I'm trying to say with Mercury in Sagittarius, but necessarily the exact grammar and the like actual kind of form of things. That's where Mercury and Sagittarius can kind of struggle. But the thing with Mercury and Sag as well, as it relates to foreign language, there can be a desire to understand something from a different perspective as it relates to foreign language. Because what I found for me is I think it really helps Mercury and Sag feel like there is, it slows it down in a way that is, it brings out a different part of me specifically when I speak about in foreign languages, where it makes me think kind of through another layer. And because I'm having to think through that other layer, I'm expanding Jupiter's capacity or Mercury's capacity. So it's actually really advantageous to learn another language to kind of help with just the expansiveness that Mercury wants to do. So learn another language, study different things. I think if you're not learning another language when it comes to Mercury, and that's the other thing too, astrology is very much just a language at the end of the day. It's just an archetypal language and placements and things, and that's all it is. And I think for me, that is the language that has spoken to me outside of just English, obviously, and Spanish and Japanese, and also a little bit of French. But they've always been, there's always been a draw towards understanding the bigger reasons behind words and the purpose behind words and the energy behind words and the kind of belief behind why we're doing what we're doing, why we're saying what we're saying, right? Those sorts of things are very Mercury in Sagittarius. And you can see that if you have Mercury in this particular sign, that yes, it's going to have, when you look up online, there's going to be so many different negative things about Mercury in Sagittarius. And as a Mercury Sagittarius astrologer myself, I want to let you know that it is your biggest gift when you have a planet in Sagittarius, even if it is Mercury, even if it is the planet that is not necessarily typically that well placed. And it can obviously, depending upon different things in the chart, can definitely struggle with that. Like I said, I struggled with a speech impediment when I was younger. I still kind of do. And the crazy part is, within my life, I am a public speaker, which is insane to me. Like it is such a wild thing to think about, where I had come from. And that's the thing, I think, with Mercury in Sagittarius, you will struggle with that speech, right? Because it's Mercury not in its best placement. But that struggle and that kind of luck that you have through speaking and understanding and making sense of the world and your intellect becomes extremely, extremely beneficial and a huge blessing in your life. So my mind has been and will continue to be one of my strongest assets. And it has helped me through so many problem-solving skills. And once again, that's also because Mercury and Jupiter for me are very connected and very, very well communicated. So they have this kind of quality of mixing and merging with one another that allows for a little bit more smoother understanding of things, where it's able to really connect to not just the bigger picture of what's going on, but also the minute details that make up that bigger picture, which I think is what Mercury Jupiter is really about when you kind of connect those two. Because like I said, I have them kind of interwoven anyway, so I can't really unlock them, or I'm going to say unlock them, I mean like, unweave them from one another. And the other thing too with Mercury and Sag, I think there is like a tendency to, because you are so capable of seeing such large information and expanding your mind so quickly and thinking so fast, it's very beneficial, but there can be, with Mercury and Sag and Mercury and Pisces, there can be a tendency to lying as well, just because of the fact that you know what to say to bend the truth, right? Because Sagittarius is all about truth, and Mercury is very trickster energy, so it can trick the truth. It can kind of make it unclear. And the difference between Mercury and Sag and Mercury and Pisces in that kind of difficulty in regards to lying is that Mercury in Sag, it tends to be so good at communicating, and that's something I don't think is really it's so good at communicating that it will, or so lucky with communicating that it can kind of just make this big story, right? And that's something that lying is about. Like lying is typically just a big convoluted story, and when Mercury and Sagittarius kind of always talk like that, like it's kind of hard to differentiate, and so there's a lot of ability to kind of just see all the information at once and then know what to share. And that's something that I don't think I would recommend Mercury and Sagittarius people doing. Lying is not a good thing. With Mercury and Sag, you definitely have a capacity to lie that's a little bit easier than the average person. But be aware that lying is not a good thing for your psyche, for your consciousness, for so many different things. And also the thing with Mercury and Sag as well, there is an aspect of swearing with this too. So there can be a sense of bluntness to this, where they're a little bit too blunt, a little bit too brash with their speech, a little bit too direct with Mercury and Sag. So it is about being able to understand the truth of why you're in that communication, what you want to get out of it. And the thing is, for me, I've, over the years, obviously, as I've done public speaking, I've gotten much better at public speaking, and the kind of way that one's brain needs to kind of think about stuff as you speak about it. And Mercury and Sag has a gift with that, a gift with being able to really bring inspiration and analyze what it is that the message is. And the thing is, for me, it took me a long time to understand what the meaning behind what I've been learning is. And even then, I get a lot of books. If you could see my bookshelf right now, you would see about 50 books that are sitting there. Mercury and Sag can just kind of, once again, with the Sag impulsivity, because it is a fire sign that's mutable, it could just be like, I want to learn this thing, I want to study this thing, I want to do this thing. It's a lot of that. And if you keep within the same realm, it'll kind of start to make sense. Like for me, all my books are kind of around the same sort of topics. So then you get to see what it is that you really are attracted to and what you really are interested by, and what you put your focus towards. Also, mail. I get too much damn mail. And I think everybody does, but like Mercury and Sag, I get way too much. It's like annoying. Too many messages, too many emails, I'm just like overwhelmed, right? And that's kind of with Mercury and Sag. It can get really overwhelmed with the amount of information, like I had said earlier, where I tend to like look at everything at once. And it naturally overwhelms me. And then Mercury and Sag is like, but this is how you look at things. And it's like, no, but that's not how to look at this, right? And it can get a little bit more difficult to work with if you don't understand how to ground that and work within your Saturn sign as well. I'm lucky because I have a pretty strong Saturn placement, so it does help kind of ground some stuff for me. But everyone with Mercury in Sag, I would recommend obviously looking at your Jupiter first and foremost, but then also looking at Saturn to see how you're kind of able to restrict and able to put boundaries and form around what it is that you're thinking about. Especially if you have like a Mercury-Saturn aspect, that's a really big deal. Now, I think that's really most of what I want to say here. I think Mercury and Sag is such a long story, and I could talk about this obviously for a long time, and I have. But there is an ultimate kind of faith and meaning. And that's something else that some people have told me. They're like, your optimism is so strong. Your faith is so strong. Your belief in is so strong. And I think that's the other part of Mercury in Sag, where there is this really strong just understanding that maybe I don't understand my story right now and why it is the way it is and why it had to go this way, but I know there's a bigger picture, right? Sag is all about the bigger picture, and Mercury always understands that. And it might not be able to see that right then and there, but it does understand that there's a bigger purpose behind the information, the story that you've had to live, and the communications that you've had. And so don't get caught up on like all the different mini conversations as well, because Mercury and Sag can also extract meaning from almost any single conversation it typically has. So don't get caught up on that, because Mercury will get distracted. Make sure there is a sense of grounding and focus and desire and intention behind your conversations as well. Make sure there's some sort of like intentional kind of, I want this to be the goal of a conversation. This is the goal I have. This is what I want to talk about. This is how I want to get there. Those sorts of things. And get lists, write lists. I mean, if you could see my wall, I have so many different lists and notes and things that I kind of keep around me. So there's a lot of information around me at all times, which can be a little bit overwhelming for those people that don't live like that. But Mercury and Sag kind of needs a lot of information to be kind of feeling like it's doing something. And that's the other thing, like Mercury and Sag can also just be surrounded by information and just accumulate information but never actually do anything. Similar to like a Mars and Virgo placement. Very, very niche comparison, but it is very true. Like there's almost this like acquisition of information when Mercury's really strong, or Mercury's really like, I guess strong or just like, prominent. Where Mercury in Sagittarius wants to just have so many different stories it wants to tell, and so many things it wants to do and say, and in Sagittarius it can have this kind of like this collection of too many different opinions and thoughts and information that it never actually like understands. Like I was saying earlier, like with all the books I've purchased, if you look at the books individually, they all have they don't really seem to be that connected. But if you connect them all as like a broader kind of scope, you can see what the main values are and the main focus is. And for me, it's mainly astrology, consciousness, finances, languages, culture, things like that. So that's kind of all of what you tend to see with Mercury and Sag, is an overwhelming amount of information. So make sure you know what you believe in, why you believe it, why you're pursuing what you're pursuing, why you're studying what you're studying, and don't try and extract meaning from everything, because you will at one point. It's pretty common to just like try and take the meaning from every single conversation, every single tidbit, it can go on this like pilgrimage. But the thing is with Mercury, Jupiter, and Mercury and Sag, it finds it fun, it's enjoyable. And then that's what I said earlier, like there's a sense of optimism that I have that is just, if I didn't have my Mercury and Sag, I don't know how I would be able to get through life, because it is such a positive, optimistic, it's my only fire placement as well, so it does lend to like my only inspiration, my only kind of motive is communication as well, or my only kind of thing that drives me is communication, or talking about philosophical, astrological, or theological things is Mercury and Sag. And so just know that like for me specifically, having this placement and speaking about it is very interesting and different. But also if you think about like all the videos I've made, they're very large, they're very long, and this obviously will be one as well that's very long. And I just speak and speak and speak until I feel that it's done, right? That's the other thing with Mercury Jupiter. Like I said, there's sometimes no limits, and it just kind of does things without limits, and that's where Saturn comes in, and Saturn needs to have and impose those limits. So just be aware of that with Mercury Jupiter as well. Obviously, if you have your Mercury in Sagittarius, I would love to hear your story. Obviously, I've shared a lot of mine, and there's a lot of different cultural and spiritual kind of aspects to it, and academic things as well that are always kind of interwoven. So yeah, just I would love to hear your story specifically, and of course, if you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all of those things. And yeah, and if you guys are interested with anything with me and want to hear from me, obviously, if you have the same Mercury as me, it'd be super fun to talk, because we kind of talk in the same circles in a lot of ways. I have said this before in previous videos with Jupiter Virgo. I'm going to reiterate it here. But when we see Mercury and Sag, there is this aspect as well of like the philosopher and the engineer kind of swapping places to a degree. And kind of have a student that is also a teacher. So it's like this really interesting kind of mixture there. So just be aware of that as well if you have this placement, kind of the analogy of, it's analogous to putting the engineer in the philosopher's class or vice versa. So just be aware of that as well. But like I said, if you're interested in anything with me and you like how I speak, you like how I teach, how I talk, feel free to put stuff down below. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and also, of course, if you want to book with me, there's stuff down there too. So that's it for Mercury and Sag. Let's move on to what Mercury means in the 9th house. We have Mercury in the 9th house. So Mercury in the 9th house is not going to be the exact same as Mercury in Sagittarius. The reasoning for that is because Mercury can be in a bunch of different signs in this 9th house here. I do want to kind of say I will be going through kind of Mercury in each sign kind of briefly throughout the course of this portion here. So stay tuned for that. But I also want to let you know that if you have Mercury in any sign prior to this video, so anything Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, or Scorpio, there is going to be a video in the playlist down below you can check out. I recommend you watch that primarily first before you look at the house placement. And then also Mercury in the 9th house is going to play out a little bit differently because of the fact that there's going to be a bunch of different kind of conversations around that. Now, when we put Mercury in the 9th house, this is really about a merging of our own story into a broader scope. So that's really the overarching theme of Mercury being placed in the 9th house, is it really wants to be able to communicate either with the divine to some degree, right? That can be an aspect of this. You also can see this with Mercury and Pisces in the 9th, or Mercury in the 12th house, like a communication with the divine. Or Mercury in the 9th is really about just finding a truth, finding a mentor, finding something to learn, something to teach, or connecting to law or legality or cultures. So when we put Mercury in the 9th, it's about really being able to speak about your worldview, communicate about your worldview, communicate about your culture or cultures in general, or communicate philosophically. Mercury in the 9th ultimately just brings our mind into foreign lands, it brings our mind into foreign cultures, it brings our mind into legal things, it brings our mind into higher knowledge, higher learning. And when I say higher knowledge, I mean things like PhDs, master's degrees, things that are really high levels of education. So when you put Mercury there, it's like putting the student and saying like, I prescribe to be a teacher, I prescribe to get my master's in that. And Mercury in certain signs is going to definitely affect how one goes about higher education, higher learning, and mentorship, both the mentors that they have in their life and then also the mentors that they learn to potentially become throughout their life as well. Mercury in the 9th does have a bunch of different qualities relative, like I said, to culture and language. And so Mercury in the 9th can have, depending upon the sign, obviously, it can have a inclination towards foreign language, foreign cultures. But there is something here about, like, more specifically with Mercury in the 9th house than it is with Mercury in Sag, where there's a theme around speaking about or writing specifically, like, for, like, court reporters. There's, like, a court reporter energy here. I could see that more with, like, Mercury in its own sign and Gemini or Virgo in that 9th house. There could be some sort of, like, needing to work through all of the jargon and the language that is within the legal system. There could be something on that, or being like a reporter in that regard. There's something about, like, even journalism can be a big part of this. These are people that with Mercury in the 9th house. This is also if, like, we had Mercury in the 9th house and it was in, like, Aquarius, or even sometimes in Pisces or in Capricorn, where I could see someone who has a career in journalism and in writing and in just being broadcasted. So this is where you can see, like, newscasters. This is where you can see, like, TV personalities, But this is more people on the news, people that are spreading the knowledge. That's what you would see more with Mercury in the ninth house, in those various signs that I mentioned. But there is an aspect of this where there is like this larger than life messaging and cultural message. There can also be just a lot of translation work you can see here with Mercury's connection to the ninth house, where there's like a trade with other countries or like a conversation with other countries. There could just be a lot of like needing to translate different worldviews, different like through language barriers. There's a really big inclination with Mercury in the ninth for like language barriers and communication barriers and being able to communicate very clearly about what your beliefs are versus someone else's. And also, like I said, there is a publishing aspect here. There is a little bit more inclination towards publishing a story, publishing your specific story, or finding a way to communicate a like real larger than life ideology. There's a sense of, I don't know why, but there's Mercury in the ninth, Mercury in Sag also, but more so Mercury in the ninth is a lot about like thesis papers, like writing like your thesis to get through, a graduate program or a PhD or a doctorate. There can be a lot of different sorts of studious things that you have to do to prove your knowledge. And that's what Mercury wants in the ninth house. It wants to prove its knowledge and prove its intellect. Because Mercury is a very intellectual planet. And in the ninth, it's going to really strive to teach something, learn something, to impact its wisdom onto some academic space. So being in academia is a really big part of this, as well as just being in like legal spaces, as well as being in spiritual spaces, finding some truth that you can connect to and communicating that. So now Mercury in various signs is going to play differently. Obviously Mercury in its own sign, I kind of mentioned that. This is where I could see a lot of like court reporters, a lot of communicators that are really deeply engrossed in like the laws and the jargon that is within the legal system. And there's an aspect of this when you put Mercury in the opposite, in the ninth house, where there's this kind of quality here of Mercury in a strong position in the ninth house. It's going to protect that. It's going to do really well in that house. So that's why I could see a lot more of a like contract writer, or not necessarily a grant writer, but someone who is able to get a lot done through their own word. Mercury does really well in both of those signs, Gemini and Virgo, for obvious reasons. And in the ninth house, it can really help. This is where you'd see a lot of translation work. I really think that's a big part of this one, more specifically, because Mercury really wants to do that. Or it could just be a logistical organization for like businesses, like some contractual organization. I could see it also with like Mercury and Libra in the ninth house. So there's an aspect of that as well. There's an avenue here when we look at Mercury specifically in like, we'll get to that in a second, but if we have Mercury in like in a Martian ruled sign, so I kind of did Mercury in its own sign first and foremost, which is interesting. But when we have Mercury in a Martian ruled sign, this is where you could have in both Aries and in Scorpio in that ninth house. This is where there's a lot of like individuation away from your own family's belief systems. And this is where you could really need to speak on that, speak against that. These are like very much the warriors when it comes to social justice things, but also beliefs that don't align with themselves or don't align with the cultures that they may be within. And they may have been born into, or the cultures they were raised and the religious kind of upbringing. So that's the thing with Mercury and Mars and Martian sign, especially Mercury and Scorpio. There's a very deep truth seeking that comes with some sense of a fight, some sense of a battle, or some sense of a kind of me versus them. I need to prove something. I need to fight something. I need to work through and push through something, some adversity, something with that. Now Mercury in a Venus ruled sign, both Taurus and Libra. Now, if you do have Mercury in Taurus in the ninth house, this is specifically going to be your chart ruler. So it's going to be pretty prominent here. This is where you're going to really have to understand your value in your specific conversations and what you specifically understand and know, and what you're bringing to a conversation, what your meaning is, what your purpose is, what your story is. That's a lot of what we see here with Mercury in the in Taurus, because it's your chart ruler for this example. Mercury and Libra, this is more like contractual writing, working with, once again, legal stuff. Whenever you put Libra in the ninth house, there's a lot of working with law that you can see here, and your mind is really about that. And then moving from that, we already did Mercury in its own sign, Mercury in the sun and moon sign, so both of the luminaries in the ninth. This is kind of like specifically a family-oriented sort of conversation. This is where the family cultural kind of connections will come in. That will be really important, especially Mercury in Cancer. And Mercury in Leo, that's similar as well, but there's kind of like an aspect, when Mercury's in a fire sign in general in the ninth house, there's this aspect of like going your own way, figuring out your own beliefs, and more of the bravery within that. Mercury in Leo is about standing proud in that and being proud of your story, what you've believed in, what you've culturally done. Mercury in the ninth, it's different. So I talked about Mars in the ninth, obviously, last time. And the thing about Mars in the ninth is there's a sense of protection of one's culture. Now, when we put Mercury in the ninth, there's a sense of communicating about one's culture, like just being able to understand one's culture, understand the cultural roots and the differences. And I see with Mercury in Cancer, and specifically Mercury in also Pisces, and also to some degree Leo in the ninth house, there's this aspect of getting so deeply engrossed in your family's culture that you're able to communicate that very deeply, and also be able to kind of like let people know about that, right? Culture is so important, and traditions are so important, and what you believe in and what beliefs were given to you are so important. So Mercury is about that conversation, and it's about being able to translate that to other people. That's why you see a lot of translation work when Mercury's in the ninth house. But it's about you translating and communicating your family's values, your cultural values to whomever you're talking about, right? There could be a sense of advocating with that as well. If we put Mercury in, any of the air signs, there's a sense of advocacy when Mercury's in an air sign, because it wants to speak about other people and other avenues that this opinion or this thought or this worldview in this example with the ninth house is affecting other people. So that's something you can also see with Mercury in the ninth house, specifically in Aquarius. Then moving on from the sun and the moon, we have Mercury I did Mercury in its own sign, and then we have Mercury in Jupiter's ruled sign. So Mercury in Sag, obviously I've spoken about that. Here, there's a lot more of like the really intense focus on that. If you have your Mercury in its own sign, in Sagittarius in that house, you have a very rich cultural experience that you're meant to understand very deeply about your family. Also, of course, look to your Mercury's ruler as well, and that's not just for Mercury in Sagittarius, it's for every Mercury sign. Look to specifically the planet that rules that Mercury for a better idea of what's going on, and also look to the aspects to see what else is happening in that regard. Moving on from the Mercury in Sag in the ninth, Mercury in Pisces in the ninth, there is this aspect here of kind of like getting lost in the family's values. That's what we tend to see with Pisces in the ninth house. There's a really deep kind of connection to the families, or just in general, just the collective values, because Pisces is such a like boundaryless sign, and so Mercury is also very boundaryless and trying to kind of absorb. So there could be a lot of impressions that are put upon you that you don't understand. Very psychic, very intuitive. Mercury in all the water signs, the ninth house, is going to have an intuitive kind of teaching ability, but Mercury in Pisces in the ninth house has this ability that is far more sensitive and far more connected. And so it's really important for Mercury and Pisces in the ninth house to have a lot of solitude, a lot of time by themselves to figure out what their truth is, what they're kind of understanding, why they're hearing what they're hearing, why they're communicating, how they're communicating, those sorts of things. That's something that you could see with that. So that's part of like what we see with Mercury in the ninth house with the Jupiter ruled signs. And then finally with Mercury and Saturn ruled signs, I already said this with Mercury specifically in Aquarius, there's a lot of advocacy here, a lot of advocating for community, advocating for like your culture's community as well. There could be a really big sort of online kind of petitions that you might be doing. I think a lot about like GoFundMes, or just like kind of really fighting for, fighting would be more indicative of like Mars, but Mercury is about really finding the courage or the communication to speak about whatever cultural thing is affecting your society or your community, and really bringing that into collective and the collective awareness. And Mercury in Aquarius has a really good gift in that, of being able to bring people's awareness towards a societal or social cause. And in the ninth house, it might quite literally impact changes on a collective level on a legal basis as well. When you put Aquarius in like the ninth house, there is an aspect of legal, larger than life, big groups of people affected by your voice change. I like that one a lot. I really like Mercury in Aquarius, and I'm really excited to eventually do that video here. And then, the Mercury in Capricorn, that's really where we see, like I said, the ones that are working in court, working in schooling. There is a lot of like deep desire to, there's a lot of deep desire for Mercury in the sign of Capricorn to like be traditional with how they're going about schooling. So there could be some really long-term goals with this. This is where you could see people go after really long-term PhDs or long-term degrees because they really believe in that from a very young age, and it was impressed upon them very early on. That's what you'll see with Capricorn placements, is they have like a very large impression pushed on them very early that they need to kind of consistently maintain. And so that's what you'll see with the ninth house, is there's almost like a belief that's really, really pressed upon you really quickly that you need to kind of work towards pursuing a career in. And so there could be like this cultural like career that you are just going to be handed this business and you know that's part of it, but what do I believe with that? How do I work with that, right? There's a sense of time that Mercury has to do when it's in Capricorn, which I'm excited to do that video eventually, obviously, next season. But overall, Mercury in the ninth house, it's really just about being able to communicate very openly about your worldview, about your beliefs, about what drives you, what inspires you, what really wants to help you get to where you want to get to. And so there is a really beautiful kind of aspect to this about communicating with the divine, communicating with your highest truth, and being able to kind of figure out what that is based off of what Mercury's sign is at in that house. So it's a really beautiful placement. I really enjoy it. I really, really do. I think obviously I'm a little bit biased because I have my Mercury in Sagittarius myself. But there is a lot of gifts that Mercury gives in the ninth, and it's about your mind, your perspective, your opinion, your word being brought into higher, broader, culturally different and legally different spaces that might need you to lend your story to them. There might be a lot of testimonies that you might need to do that are really advantageous to many different people in many different places. And that's something I think is really beautiful about the ninth house. It's really when we begin to see the impact of our beliefs and the impact of our story in a way that is so much larger than us. And I think it's really, really beautiful to see. And if you have your Mercury in the ninth house or Mercury in Sagittarius, I'd love to hear your story and how this video has resonated with you and what you've thought about it. And I also love to hear like what Mercury placement you have in the ninth house and how that has played out. And if you have any questions about your chart, feel free to put it down below in the comments. And obviously, as you know, like, comment, share, subscribe, all those things. I love doing this. This is what I do. And my goal is to just obviously do this series. It's been a very long-winded series and it's been going on for quite a while here. But it is something I really enjoy doing. And if this video helps just one person, that's all I care about. And I hope it does. I hope it helped you to some degree. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening to me yap as my Mercury Sagittarius self for so long. And I will have other videos coming out here. And obviously, like I said earlier, if you have any planets prior to Sagittarius in the ninth house, there's a video down below or a playlist down below with those videos for you. And if anyone's interested in booking with me, connecting with me, whatever, all that stuff is down there too. And yeah, I'm really excited to keep going on with this Sagittarius series here. Super, super fun, super exciting. I really appreciate you for tuning in. And I will see you on the next one where we talk specifically about what Jupiter means in Sagittarius in the ninth house. So love you guys. Thank you. Talk to you guys soon.